Let's start with interviewing. There's 3 topics I want to cover here. Asking the right questions. Most of you don't. What you can't ask, according to the wage and hour people in our Department of Labor, and the critical mistake most owners make. What do you think is the one mistake most owners make?
Hire the first guy that can fog a mirror that they think that might be able to spin a wrench.
Well, that's true. Believe it or not, it's even worse than that. Here's the critical mistake owners make. They sell the job and the company instead of interviewing the candidate. I watch this all the time. I listen to the interview, and the whole time, well, this is what we do, and this is what we're about, and this is how my company got started, blah, 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 and they talk the whole time. They don't ask them any questions. Can you fix cars? Cool. Well, let me tell you about our company. Here's what I'm looking for. This is a mistake for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, you get no information. Reason number 2, the more you share with someone of personal information, and of course your business is very personal too, the more you inherently like them. I learned in sales a long time ago, if I want to get a prospect to buy from me, all I have to do is let them start talking. The more they talk, the easier it was to get them to say yes. When it comes to the interview process, you need to ask the right questions and not be selling the company. One of the things I do for most of my clients is when they interview some people, I'll do the final interview just to make sure they're a good fit. And my interview questions are very different, which I'll share some of them with you. You really got to learn to ask the right questions. And what's interesting is when you sell the job and the company, instead of really asking questions, it makes you seem desperate, and it's a turnoff to any employee that's worth hiring. They'll typically lose interest. So here's the stuff the Department of Labor says we can't ask. Age, because you cannot discriminate based on age. Health-related questions, not supposed to ask that. You can't ask gender preference. Now, I used to say you can't ask gender. Now it's gender preference. Sexual preference, can't ask that. Marital status, can't ask that. Children's status, do you have any kids? Cannot ask that. Cannot ask if the kids live with them if they don't. Cannot ask them their race. Cannot ask them their religion. And you cannot ask them their political view. Virtually everybody is a protected class, except you as a shop owner. So you got to be careful there. But here's the good news. You want to know all this information. And you can get the information, you just can't ask them for it. Because if you ask the right questions, they'll volunteer what you want to know. So let me give you some of my favorite questions. Hey, what do you like to do on weekends? Well, I have my kids every other weekend, blah, blah, blah. What does that tell me?
Divorced.
And if they say Wednesday nights and every other weekend, what does that tell me? It tells me that they are paying child support, which means one of the interview questions might be, hey, can you give me some of this pay in cash, which is a common question, because when they get paid more money, that shows up in the child support thing. So that could be a potential roadblock, because that way, when you give bonuses, it's going to cost twice as much. To see any difference in their income, personally, they're going to have to pay that out. So that can be a challenge for you. Also, it tells me they're going to be late every other Monday and every Thursday morning. Why does it tell me that?
Dropping the kids off.
That's exactly right. If they're a good parent, they're going to be dropping the kids off at school, which means they're going to be late every other Monday and every Thursday. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with making an accommodation for that. Obviously, it has to work into your schedule. If that's a good parent, they're involved in their kids. I like parents that are involved, even if they're not the primary custodial parent. I like the fact they're involved with their kids. They're stable. They're focused. They make good employees. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? What's your plan? Well, I'm kind of hoping to own my own shop. Well, I'm probably not going to want that guy to be my service manager, or that woman to be my service manager, because they'll take all my customers. Or, I'm kind of looking for a home. That one always worries me a little bit. So if I hear that one, I go, oh, yeah, okay, well, tell me about the previous place you worked. What'd you love about it? If you had a Harry Potter magic wand, is there anything about it you would have changed? As opposed to what do you not like about it? And I want to see what kind of stuff they say. I'll give you an example. So one young fella was starting to go, oh man, I hated the last place I worked at. They sucked and blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, okay, well, here's another one of my questions. Since you're currently employed, if we offer you the position, when would you be available for employment? The answer I'm looking for, even if I want them today, is, well, I'd like to give my current employer 1 to 2 weeks. But one kid told me, oh man, I'll just tell them today, I'm out of here. Guess what? They're going to do that to you too. My next question, if I say, when will you be available, is sometimes employers go ahead and let you go when you decide to move on. Sometimes it's best for both parties. If they do that, when would you be available for work? Oh, I can come to work tomorrow. Okay, good. The questions I ask are less important than their body language. One of the things we're going to talk about next time and in future webinars is how to read people like a book. There's something called the DISC test. It's a personality profile test. Interviewees and customers are not going to take that test before you talk to them. But once you understand how the forward personality talk and act and interact, you can pretty much pick them out pretty quick. And you need to adapt your personality to communicate with them and also find out how they respond to it. Because a lot of times it's not what they say that matters, it's what they don't say, but you see their mannerism change that matters. Ladies, have you ever had a fella come up to you in a bar, church, or whatever, and before he even starts to open his mouth, something in your soul goes, there's something wrong with this dude, or this is not someone I want to interact with? Have you ever had that thing happen to you?
Of course.
Why? Because you're looking for more than the words. You're looking for how do they present? How do they walk? These are the things I'm looking for in an interview as well. I do some interviews over Zoom. Matter of fact, I do a lot of them for my client over Zoom, but it's a face-to-face. I get to see them. Some I do over phone. But you want to listen to, do they pause? How do they respond? You also need to identify what type of personality they are. You need to know if they're a high I, high D, high S, or high C. High Ds are the technicians that turn the most hours. They don't like to work with other technicians. They're just like, if you got work and you get out of my way and you throw work at me, you'll never hear from me, but I'll turn a ton of work. That's your high D. They're not going to be your mentors for other people. They hate shop meetings. They don't like rah-rah events. They don't want to come to your Christmas party. You ask them what they did on the weekend, they're going to go, the weekend was fine. What's on the agenda today? What do you got? High driven. They love flat rate. They love independence. Your high Is make good salespeople and terrible managers. I have a client right now has a high I as his manager, not a good fit. The high I is essentially a narcissist. Now, I'm putting it that strong. It doesn't mean they don't like people, but their whole world is about how it makes them feel about themselves. The problem that you run into with a high I manager is they shoot from the hip. Everything is they just want to be in the moment. They don't plan for anything. This one fellow said, well, on a battlefield, as soon as you make plans, they go to hell because you have to adapt to the situation. That's true for someone who's a commander on the battlefield or a captain that doesn't really know the big agenda. Soldiers win battles. Logistics win wars. The only way you survive the war is if you have the right people and the right shells and the right ammo and the right materials and the right guns. And that's a function of logistics. You want a manager that plans. A manager should know on Monday what they plan to do on Thursday. When Thursday comes around, sure, you have to adapt sometimes in the heat of the battle. But if you don't have a contingency plan, they're not a good fit. The problem you run into with a high I manager is anytime you try and do any kind of feedback where you're trying to get them to change their behavior, they're going to take it as a personal attack. For example, I have one guy who's very analytical, says, I want to make some changes. And when you did this thing, I'm kind of thinking maybe we should do it the other way. High I takes that as a personal attack. You need to know that in this interview process. They make great salespeople. They can sell ice to Eskimos, but they suck at managing people. Your high Cs, they're like owls. They're very methodical. They tend to think before they talk. You'll tend to hear a long pause when you ask them a question because they're thinking about it. The high I will answer instantly. He'll cut you off in the middle of your sentence. So will the high D. But the high C, they're going to think about it. They're tending to talk slow. You don't want to interrupt them because if you do, they'll shut down on you. And they tend to be very interested in the how things work at the shop. The high D just wants to know, hey, what do you want? Yeah, I can do that. Get out of my way. The high I wants to know who's going to do it, and it ain't going to be me. The high C wants to know, what do you want done? And they want to know all the details. That'll tend to ask you a lot of detailed questions. And the high S just wants to get along with everybody. They want to know the why. Why do we do things? Why is it important? 40% of the population are actually high S's. They're called doves. They're people that'll work for causes to save the world or save the planet or save some lizard or whatever. That's their thing. And so you need to know that. You need to know what's a good fit for what you need. If I'm looking for a high dynamic tech, I'm looking for a high D. If I'm looking for someone who can sell, I'm looking for an I. If I'm looking for someone who's going to help write processes, I'm looking for a high C. If I'm looking for someone who's compliant, doesn't give me a lot of grief, and it's not a lot of work, I'm going to hire a high S. Everybody wants a high S. Why? Because they do whatever you tell them to do. You know why Matt doesn't like a high S? Why do I not want to hire someone who will do whatever I tell them to do?
Because that's all they'll do.
Exactly. Think outside the box. That's the problem with the high S. You need a certain amount of those. But this is what I'm looking for when I'm asking these questions is how do they respond? High S's, high C's always respond slowly. They never interrupt. The high C will ask detailed questions. The high S will ask more emotional questions. The high D and the high I, they'll interrupt you in the middle of the question. And that's okay. I want to know who I'm dealing with, and that will help. If you have a high I service writer and a high C tech or vice versa, they can't connect each other because the high C will want to make the rules. And the high I will say, those are great rules. I'm glad I thought of them, but then none of them apply to me. So that's where you got to be a little careful. What do you like to go on vacation? Oh, well, we're really religious. We go to such and such. Oh, that's awesome. Tell me more about that. Just simple questions. What do you like to do? What do you enjoy doing on the weekends? Well, we go to church every Sunday. I'm in the church choir or whatever. Okay, cool. That sounds great. Ask questions and listen.